Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast of Talk to Rami. This is Rami, your host. Today, I am pleased to have a special person in the studio because we want to talk about resilience, how you're going to get out of your situation and make a better life for yourself. Anne Grady is here. She's a public speaker, author, and resilience researcher. And the good part is she's the truth bomb dropper. I love that because nothing works more than the truth. And welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. But I read your book last night, and it's very fascinating. And I tell everybody that you should read her latest book, Mind Over Moment. You got to read this. This is an amazing book. I highlighted pretty much all over the book. You know, it's a very interesting book, and you have a very interesting life, you know, before and after.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit how you started, how you become a resilience researcher? I'm sure you went through lots of stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, resilience researcher means have been dragged through the mud. And I came out the other side. That's what resilience researcher means. No, I've always been fascinated with speaking and teaching and training and consulting, and my master's degree is in organizational communication. So I started my career as a trainer and was doing work on communication and leadership and emotional intelligence and influence. But then I got pregnant with my son, Evan, and, right away I knew something wasn't right. And the farther along I got in the pregnancy, the worse things got. And so, my doctor used to joke that he was going to be a soccer player because he would kick me so hard I'd fall to the ground. He was going to be the next Pele. And then when he was born, the nurse came into the room and she looked at me very seriously and she was like, I've been doing this 30 years. I have never met a baby this angry. And as a first-time mom, this was not the news that I wanted to hear. He cried constantly. And I kept going to pediatricians. My pediatrician, his pediatrician told me that if I were more consistent and a better mom, I'd have a better baby. My ex-husband, his father, left when he was 18 months old. He was just, the baby was inconsolable. And Evan just kind of escalated and was really aggressive and irritable kind of chronically. And so when he was 11 months old, I had started him in early childhood intervention therapy because we didn't know what was wrong. When he was 3, he tried to kill me with a pair of scissors because I wouldn't give him more ice cream. And when he was 4, he started his first antipsychotic. At the age of 7, he was in his first pediatric psych unit in Dallas, and I lived at the Ronald McDonald House for 2 months while he underwent inpatient psych treatment. And it's been a journey in and out of hospitals, residential treatment centers. Evan's 20 now.
Wow.
And he has a diagnosis. He has multiple diagnoses, but basically severe mood dysregulation disorder, ADHD, autism, oppositional defiant disorder, and then you throw on top of that some developmental delays and neurological challenges. So it's just this perfect neurological storm that has really put me to the test. And then in the middle of all of it, after his second hospitalization, I was diagnosed with a tumor in my salivary gland that resulted in facial paralysis. And so a couple of days after the surgery, a speck of dust scratched my cornea. I couldn't close my eye. I was waiting for my eye patch to come in from Amazon. And so before I got a gold weight implanted, they didn't anticipate my facial nerve would recover. So they put a gold weight into my eyelid to help weigh it down, and they stitched up my bottom eyelid to help, protect my eye. But the weekend before that, my mom, who is a flight attendant, she's 74 and she's a flight attendant. I'm not supposed to tell you which airline, but we'll call it Southwest. But she gave us a couple of passes, told us to go away for the weekend. And while we were, on our trip, we went to Vegas before my eye surgery and radiation. And I fell down a flight of stairs and broke my foot in 4 places. So then I started radiation, and 3 weeks after that, my first book came out, and I was in India 3 weeks later speaking for a corporate client. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. Evan is, he's stable. He's the most stable he's ever been, but it's a lifelong journey. And so resilience isn't something you either have or you don't. It's a muscle that you build. And whether we like it or not, life gives us lots of chances to practice. And it's like you can't do, one crunch and have six-pack abs. Well, you've got to be tested. And life gives us these chances, and we get to decide how we use those experiences and what we do with them and how we practice. But it's a practice. There's no perfect. I still have crappy days. I still have bad moods. I still get sad. I still get overwhelmed. But these are skills that you can build up and practice them to the point where they become muscle memory, so that you can proactively cultivate these things as a buffer, right? You basically have this buffer zone that guards against the shocks of life. And you have two choices. You can decrease the demands, the stressors, which most of us don't have a lot of control over, or you can increase the resources and your capacity to absorb it. And that's really where my work focuses. I work with teams, executives, leaders, large audiences, small groups, and really focus on some of the ways that you can build this capacity.
Well, while I was reading your book, I was thinking about that. As you said, you went through a lot, like as everybody else. We all have different stories,
Right.
different struggles. But sometimes you get to the point that, personally, I got to that point many times that you said, "I'm done. I'm overwhelmed. Enough is enough." And then your something kicks in. Like mine is a mindset that it says that, "Well, I'm going to do this." It's a practice, and you get so close. Like your analogy about swimming in the ocean or swimming in the swimming pool, it's the same thing. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's wavy. But how some people, they giving in and they give up. What they missing? My question is, what are they missing that you did not miss and you kept on going? Which is your story is like, when I listen to it and think about my stuff, I say, "Hey, dude, you have nothing."
So it's funny because I just did an event, a large conference. There were a couple thousand people, and one of the guys came up to my book signing table afterwards, and he was like, "I thought my life was crappy, but you really put it in perspective." I was like, "Well, I didn't want to be that poster child." But, first I would say it's all relative, right? We all struggle at 100%. And trying to compare your struggle with someone else's, it's called comparative suffering. And it's an exercise in futility. Each of us has our own stuff, and we all deal with it the best that we can. Why do some people give up and others keep going? There's a couple of reasons. One, I didn't have a choice. Clearly, we all have a choice, right? But for me, failure was not an option. And trying to find answers was the catalyst that kept me going, trying to help Evan. And in the process, learning about the brain and the way that we process trauma and adversity. So the real difference between those who give up and those who keep going is a lack of skill. That's all it is. They're just skills that you can learn.
Wow.
And unfortunately, no one learns them in school. They teach you algebra,
Yes.
But I use resilience way more than algebra.
You're absolutely
right? Like there's these skills that you can cultivate, and it's not an all or nothing. It's adopting these little practices over time that build up that muscle so that you call on it when you need it. But make no mistake about it, you're going to get knocked down, and most people at some point have this feeling like, "I can't do it. I'm not strong enough. I don't want to do it anymore." And I had all of those thoughts and feelings. Our thoughts and feelings aren't facts. So you can learn to experience those and give yourself permission to do so. One of the things that most of us don't like is to feel icky. We don't like uncomfortable emotions, sadness, grief, fear, anxiety. So we try to numb them. Bless you. We try to numb them. It's why alcohol sales skyrocketed at the beginning of COVID, right? Because nobody wants to feel those things. The problem is when you try not to feel something, it's like me telling you to go on a diet but not think about chocolate cake. Because wherever you attune your attention, that becomes your reality. So when you try not to feel those things, you actually feel them more intensely. You feel them for longer. And what we have to do is train ourselves to sit in the suck, to let ourselves experience the grief and the sadness and the fear. And you don't have to marinate in it, right? But you've got to give yourself experience to feel it. And there are skills that you can use for your mind, for your brain, to train your brain to work for you rather than against you, which it typically is working against
Basically,
you.
what you're telling me that
Yeah.
we control our mind doesn't control us.
Exactly. That's a great way to say it. Yes, we control our mind doesn't control us, but most of us just assume that our brain is designed to help us. And it is if your only goal is to stay alive.
It's a safety mechanism.
Right. And it used to be this adaptive resource so that if you're getting chased by a tiger in the savannas,
you run,
or you play dead and it loses interest, or you fight back. But your brain can't differentiate between a tiger, a global pandemic, or an email from your boss saying we need to talk. So anytime we're triggered, what happens is 20% of the blood and the oxygen goes from our brain into our limbs to help us fight, freeze, or run away. Our sympathetic nervous system is activated. So everything you don't need to survive shuts down. Digestion, reproduction, salivation, immune function, all of those things shut down as a mechanism to protect you. The problem is most of us are chronically in a threat state, overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline. And wherever you spend the most time, that's what your body defaults to. So the more time you spend anxious and stressed, the easier that becomes your default. And we can shift the way our body responds to stress and the way our brain responds to stress. And in the book, I walk through the 3 basic ways to do that: your mindset, a skill set, and the ability to reset. And it's basically, like you said, it's just making your mind work for you to create the life you deserve, not just survive the one you're in.
And then, I'm so happy you mentioned that, because the resilience is something that I think that you have to work, you have to build it. It's not something that you can copy. It's not something that you can just say, hey, that's the formula. Yes, they give you a formula. What I think is a practice, which is you have, like you were talking about it, and you have in your book that, you can actually reset your resilience. And there is a way to do that, which is you take those steps, right?
Well, there's ways to cultivate that buffer zone. It's kind of like psychological bubble wrap. There's ways to build that cushion. There are also ways to reset your nervous system. So you can control your body and its response to stress if you know what it's doing. Right. So a lot of times people are focused very much on reducing stress, but when you're focused on that, your brain is paying attention to and looking for stress. Instead, we can cultivate different skills and emotions to offset the stress response. So for example, anytime you're laughing, anytime you're connected with people and feel cared for, anytime you're looking for things to be grateful for, anytime you're practicing optimism, anytime you are focusing on taking care of yourself or spending time on what's most important to you, or controlling your tech rather than let your tech control you, all of those things are safety signals for your brain. And just like your brain can't tell the difference between a real or perceived threat, it doesn't know the difference between real or perceived safety. So we can put our brain and our nervous system in a state of safety, and it's not hard to do. It's simple, but it's difficult to remember when you're in that state, which is why it's so important to practice over and over and over again so that it becomes just autopilot, automatic.
And what is the mindset here? What we do, the mindset is I think the mindset is one of the biggest elements of this process.
Right. It's kind of like your toolbox. It's the foundation. Yeah. And one is knowing that your brain is a phenomenal organ, but its main focus is survival. And so we've developed something called a negativity bias. And basically what that means is our brain is like Velcro to negative experiences. The second you have a negative experience, it's encoded immediately into your neural structure.
That's how we hold on
to it. And trauma is stored in your brain and your body at the cellular level, right? So we can offset that. But for example, a simple strategy that most people don't think about, if you wake up and within the first 30 minutes of being awake, you're checking your email, you're looking at the news, you're checking your social media feed, all of those are like flipping on your negativity bias light switch, and it primes your brain to scan your environment during the day for everything that's wrong. And we find what we look for. So when you're looking for all the things that are wrong, right, you're more likely to find them. But we can offset that. So something as simple as going 30 minutes in the morning with no negative stimulus. Of course, if you have kids, you're wrestling, and if there's obvious stuff that you can't avoid, but no one turns on the news and feels better. Like, think of the last time you watched the news. It wasn't like, oh, there's all these wonderful people in the world doing kind things for each other. It's poverty and war and illness and death and guns and violence. And that is putting your brain on an alert state. You don't check email first thing in the morning and find out you won the lottery and don't need to come to work, or look at your social feed and find your friends on their tropical vacations with their perfect pictures while you're fighting with your significant other over how to load a dishwasher, right? We compare our insides to everybody else's outsides, and that just primes your brain for negativity. The other part of your mindset, though, is the story you tell yourself about your life. And it's called your explanatory style. So for years, I told myself how unfair my life was. Why do my friends have healthy kids and I don't? Why do my friends get to take their kids to the grocery store and mine pulls down the end cap? Why do my friends get to discipline their kids and put them in timeout and mine sends me to the ER? It's not fair. Now, that story is true, right? But we believe what we tell ourselves. So you have to shift your story if it's not serving you. The mistake most people make is to go from a negative to a positive. So they try to go from this sucks to this is awesome. What a great opportunity to practice. And your brain doesn't believe you. Your brain can go from a negative to a neutral. It can go from this sucks to it is what it is. From I can't do it to I'll figure it out, right? From I'm not good enough to all I can do is all I can do. And so when we start training our brain to go from negative to neutral and challenging that belief system, that builds a different mindset. It's also understanding, quite frankly, that we assign negative connotation to stress. When we think of stress and anxiety, we default to, I'm so stressed about my stress, I'm anxious about my anxiety. It's really just your body's alarm system. And if you know how to listen to it and what to do about it, then it doesn't become crippling. Now, that's not to say there aren't true anxiety disorders. I was diagnosed with depression at the age of 19, right? So trust me, the irony of a depressed motivational speaker is not lost on me. But I really have to practice these things as a survival mechanism. So I know they work. And if they work for someone who's got clinical depression and lots of anxiety and real life trauma and things that have happened, then they can work for anybody. And I'm not suggesting you don't need medication or a therapist, but there are tools and skills that you can learn to improve your mindset.
That's what, I love what you said it in your book, the Penelope syndrome.
Penelope, yeah.
The Penelope syndrome. And I think that's true because as you said, I know I'm one of them, we get up and we just do what we were doing every day. As you said, check your emails, do your social media, which is I don't do that because I'm a big believer that when you get up in the morning, you should, like you having a breakfast, you have to feed your mind with positive things. That's what I listen to speaking. I listen to TED Talks. I listen to motivation. And then before I get to work, my mind is already pumped and my mind is already ready for another battle. But most of us, unfortunately, we go to do this cycle and then we can't get out of it. Yeah. Like we are stuck. And right. I know a lot of people are asking right now, listening or watching, so how can I get out of this like a circle and that I can just do what I want to do and just have a better life and take my life to the next level. What are your thoughts on that?
So Penelope syndrome is what I call it. Yeah. I had a gerbil when I was little. Yeah. Well, I had 20 guinea pigs, and that is a whole nother story. But I finally ended up with a gerbil that just ran on this wheel all the time, right? And it made me, I was in my mid-30s, and I was like, I am this gerbil. I am Penelope. I've been running on this wheel. Am I any closer to reaching my goals? No. And a lot of us do that. We're just busy being busy, and we forget that busy doesn't create the life you want. It creates exhaustion. So the first is to acknowledge you're on the wheel and that you want something different. And most of us change one of two ways. We're either inspired by what we want, or we're desperate and the pain is too severe where we are that we're willing to be uncomfortable to do something new. But habit change is uncomfortable. And a lot of times it's easier to stay comfortable with old problems because it's a well-worn path, It's kind of like the bumpy road with all the potholes. Sometimes it's easier to take that one because you know the way. Whereas if you take the clean, clear, easy path, you might get lost and it's uncomfortable. And so that's the same thing with our habits. Your brain takes anything you repeatedly think, say, or do and creates a cognitive shortcut. It's like crossing your arms when you're cold, right? We just do it. We don't think about it. But if I asked you to cross your arms in a different direction, that would take some work because your brain has to create these new patterns and neural pathways. And the more often you practice them, the easier it gets. So one is, am I desperate enough or inspired enough to be uncomfortable? And once you have decided, yep, I really want to change my behavior, I want to change my life, then you start by practicing some of these skills. And it could be cognitive, like it could be the shifting your thoughts and your mindset and the way you view stress. It could be mindfully paying attention to what your body is doing, because that's sending, most of us think I have to change my thoughts, but you can't think your way into a different nervous system state. 80% of the information comes through our body and goes to our brain, not the other way around. So I've done therapy for years with myself, with Evan, and you're always taught, and it's really helpful to learn how to shift your thoughts, but a lot of therapists are now starting to focus on how do you shift your bodily response, because that in turn helps put your brain in a state of safety, which then allows you to shift your thoughts. So there are ways you can use your brain, there are ways you can use your body, and there are ways you can intentionally cultivate positive emotions to offset the stress response. Most of us are like, how do I reduce stress? The goal is to increase joy. And when we're busy and we're tired, those are the things that get off our to-do list. Going to have coffee with a friend, watching a funny video, taking time to practice gratitude or listen to things that are uplifting or journal, or there's a million different things that you can do, and what works for one person might not work for the other. So you have to experiment and find what resonates with you. But slowly over time, when you change your behavior and you change your nervous system, your life just changes and it improves. But it takes time and it's uncomfortable.
Basically what I'm hearing is that, you have to be, at the same time, you have to be positive. You have to be realistic. You have to be realistic, because I can be positive all day long and say, hey, I'm going to, win the lottery ticket, but that's not really realistic. And you have to be comfortable to be uncomfortable.
So there's realistic optimism, right? Which is not, I'm wearing rose-colored glasses and I'm pretending like there's nothing negative. Of course there is, and you have to acknowledge that. Optimism doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. It means things are going to improve or get better over time. And we tend to think that the version of me I am today is the version I'm going to be in 10 years. And the truth is, you want the version of you tomorrow to be a better version of you than you today. We want to keep growing and improving, and that means your thoughts change, your opinions change, your ideas change. But as children, everything we do is uncomfortable. Think of a baby trying to walk, right? They're stumbling around everywhere, they're bumping into stuff. Imagine if a baby was sitting there and they just went, you know what, this walking thing is not for me. It's too hard, I'm not doing it. But babies don't do that because they know you have to go through uncomfortable, situations, and you have to feel discomfort. It's just natural. We grow. But then you get to adulthood and you're like, you know what? I'm tired of being uncomfortable. I'm tired of learning and growing, and I just want to be comfortable. The problem is when we stay that way too long, that becomes our expectation and our default. So you do have to grow your discomfort tolerance.
That's the comfort zone.
Yeah. And you have to grow that comfort zone by being uncomfortable and trying new things and going to new places and experiencing new people and cultures and situations and languages. And it's all just about being deliberate and intentional about the actions and behaviors that you take, because we get so sucked into our habits that we end up living on autopilot. And we look up and 20 years has gone by, and we may or may not be any closer to reaching our goals. So this is not easy. It's not for wimps.
It's not easy because most of us, we stuck in our comfort zone, and the fear of failure, that I want to step out of my comfort zone, I might fail. And as you say, the brain, I think, is designed to prevent you of those
Yeah.
thoughts that is going to push you out of that comfort zone, and therefore you're going to stuck to where you were
Exactly.
before. Now I'm getting it, that how this brain works, because with my personal experience, I served and lost man in the battlefield, all that stuff. For me, it was very hard to cope with that, and I'm working on my mindset and everything else. But right now, every situation that I go through, it says it's not worth of dying. I can't give up. Me personally, in my life, I can't give up. I try and try and try. And I don't want to be in comfort zone. I feel the pain and everything else, but I keep going because I have a belief that if you stop, you die.
Right. And it's shifting. This is where a growth mindset comes in. It's shifting your view of failure from being fatal and losing to learning. Right. And so most of us don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to fail, right? Like nobody wants to fail, but are you focused more on looking good or learning? Are you focused more on comparing yourself to other people or being a better version of you tomorrow than you are today? Are you trying to extract the lessons and use them to get smarter? Because if you're like, think about learning a new task or a new skill or a new computer program, right? It stinks. It takes longer. It's clunky. It's uncomfortable. Most people don't like that feeling. That feeling is your comfort zone expanding. And you have to be willing to shift your view of the discomfort from bad to necessary.
And I think when we talk about having an attitude for gratitude, that's when it kicks in. I don't know. We are grateful, some stuff, but having that attitude for gratitude, that's a different story. And we have, I'm sure, I've read your book and you talk about, the gratitude. And I think that's played a big role too. If you combine all this, I think the mindset and resilience, it would get us to where we want to be. Don't you think?
So I'm a skeptic, and I when people told me, when my face was partially paralyzed and people told me to practice gratitude, I thought they were out of their mind. I was like, wait a minute. You want me to be grateful that my son is in a psych hospital, my face is paralyzed, my career is over. Like, I just started catastrophizing. But here's the science behind gratitude. When you are just looking for something to be grateful for or something that is right in your life right now, your cortisol level, the stress hormone, drops by 23%.
Wow.
Meaning you don't even have to find anything. Just looking signals safety to your brain. Now, a lot of people practice gratitude, but they don't practice the full gratitude that really changes your brain. So there's a couple things to know. One, when you think about something you're grateful for, use the word because. I'm grateful to be here with you today because I'm making a new friend. I'm getting to experience something new. It's exciting and cool to be here. You have to use because it helps you understand why. And that solidifies it into your brain. You have to sit in the good feeling. So you get a parking spot up front or somebody gives you a compliment. Most of us just kind of go on our way. You have to soak that in. It's called savoring. For about 15 seconds, you've got to just register that good feeling. And that permanently embeds that experience into your neural structure. Whereas the negative experience is embedded immediately, you have to soak in the positive ones for them to really register. But the other thing is you have to communicate it to the person, right? So if I'm grateful to you or for you, I have to tell you that. And what that does is it increases dopamine and serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitters and antidepressants. It increases it for the sender, me, and for the receiver, you. And it creates this kind of spiral effect where once you start learning to scan your environment for the things that are right, you don't ignore the things that are wrong, but you offset your brain's propensity to only search for the negative. And most of us aren't aware it's happening. So I have I call these moments delicious moments. They're these moments that we rush past in our search for happily ever after. And so in my office, I have a giant cork board. It's called my Delicious Moments board. And every time I get an email that is, saying you helped me, or I have a great experience, or my dog does something silly, right? I write it down on a sticky note or take a picture of it. I really feel it for 15 to 20 seconds, and then I put it on the board. So what happens in that, and this can work with a journal, it can work with a gratitude jar. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. But what happens is you have that surge of positive emotion. You sit in it, you write it down, you experience it again when you put it on the board and think about it. Every time I look at the board, I remember it. But then I have to prune the board because, it grows over time. And then when you're taking things off the board, yesterday I added a couple of new things to the board, and I took down a couple of things because I needed to make room for it. And one was the email from a client saying that he really appreciated the ease of working with me because I made it super easy, and that just made me feel great. So I put that in a big gratitude box where I store all this stuff. Another was a name badge for my TED Talk. My second TED Talk had this cool name badge. That was really exciting. I've gotten to savor that over and over again. I put that in the gratitude box. And then once a year, my husband and I just dig through our gratitude boxes and we just giggle and laugh and remember some of these good experiences, which, by the way, more permanently embeds that into your neural structure. And it's just this cycle. So I disagree with this premise that we should always be positive, right? There's people who have this toxic level of positivity where you're struggling and you don't feel great, and someone's like, come on, turn that frown upside down. You have so much to be grateful for. Like, that is not helpful, because then not only do you feel bad, now you feel shame for feeling that way.
We hear that a lot. Like, I hear that a lot when, things doesn't go well. Everybody says that, oh, I know this doesn't go well, but you have to be grateful for this, that. And now when you mentioning this, I understand that sometimes doesn't help. You have to actually be more realistic and just see what is going on really.
Well, and I don't think people do it to be
it's just a norm.
Difficult. It's just the norm. When someone doesn't feel well, we want them to feel better. But what we don't realize is that, and a lot of people don't understand, and I didn't understand, I've had to learn this, is that emotions are not good or bad. Right? We assume intent, but they're not. When I feel anxious, it's my body's built-in alarm system telling me to pay attention. Asking me, are you in real danger, or are you just in perceived danger? Are you stressed about an unknown outcome, or are you anxious internally because you're worried about a health diagnosis? It's really, when I feel sad or we feel sad, we don't want to feel that way. So we numb it and run from it. What we need from people, and if you're someone who's trying to comfort someone who is going through a hard time, instead of trying to fix it, just be there. Just listen and validate it. Yeah, that does sound hard. I can understand why you'd be upset. I feeling sad stinks. Right? You have every right to feel that way. That puts people in a state of safety because they're not having to now defend their emotion.
Did you have anybody tell you when you were going through stuff with Evan?
I had lots of people tell me everything would be fine. I had lots of people when I told them I thought I had a tumor that said it's not a tumor. And it was the best intent, right? It's not like anybody is trying to make things worse. But then you feel isolated because you feel like you can't talk about it. And that's why therapy is so helpful. It's an objective person whose job is not to make you feel happy and perfect about everything, but to process it and to talk about it and to get it out. And so I have a group of friends that I don't know what I would do without them. I call them my tribe. And I'm blessed beyond measure to have them. But they just are there. They just sit with you. When I had facial paralysis and I was crying with half my face, they came over and sat with me and watched movies. We didn't even talk. We just were there. And sometimes that's all someone needs. They just need to know they're not alone.
We have our brain, and I'm listening to you. We have mindset, and the mindset comes with the way we think and we process things, analyze things. We have internal forces, as you know, and we have external forces that are trying to get to our mind and the brain, like the events, like a COVID, like most, there's a lot of stuff out there that's trying to get to our mindset. How can we stop this or change it, that external forces, to affect our brain? I know we can be positive, but I don't think so that's going to help. how can we stop that or decrease that external forces? Because the internal, we can tell ourselves and work it and, create the skills, work the skills, but like negative people, for example, external forces or some other stuff, how can we cope or, manage that, that external forces? Have you ever had situation or...
We all do, right? We all have I think 98% of people report having toxic behavior at work, right? We all have that cranky coworker. We all have the boss or a manager or a friend or a family member who brings us down. The first step, I think, is to really pay attention to your locus of control. So the locus of control is, like you mentioned with the brain, is your life happening to you or are you in charge of your life? So people who believe that things happen to them that they have no control over, like if I were to say like, oh, it's not fair, I got, this situation with Evan, it's not fair, my face got paralyzed, it's not fair, this happened or that happened, that's an external locus of control. And the problem with it is it takes you and puts you in a place of being a victim. Because then it's everything's happening to me, I don't control it. And are there things that happen that you can't control? Absolutely. But somebody with an internal locus of control says, okay, it is what it is. What part of that can I control? Can I control how often I'm with this negative person? Can I control setting clear boundaries and letting them know what's okay and what's not okay? Can I control how much mental real estate I let them occupy? Right? You wouldn't let a burglar just run into your house and take your stuff.
Yep.
But we have brain burglars all the time. It's usually us. My daughter's therapist calls it her shitty committee. We all have this like committee in our head who's telling us we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. Most of the negative forces in our life come from us. And we have to push back and challenge that. And we also have to be deliberate about taking control of the things we can, setting boundaries or being clear about the things that we can't. And then more importantly, how do you extract meaning from your experiences? So did I want a child who struggles as much as Evan? No, his life is super hard. What meaning do I extract? Well, I've talked to hundreds of thousands of people on stages all over the world about mental health and trying to reduce the stigma. A portion of all my book proceeds go to the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Central Texas. And I'm a huge mental health advocate. I've testified in front of the Texas legislature to change policy. I would never have done any of those things had it not been for my experiences with Evan. Now, I might not have chosen them, but I get to choose what to do about them. My facial paralysis, I truly believe, and my doctor believed that a lot of that was from inflammation and my body's stress response. When we have overproduction of cortisol and adrenaline for long periods of time, your immune system wears down, your heart variability, you're more likely to have cardiac disease, you're more likely to have strokes, you're more likely to have high blood pressure. All of these things are your body's response. What meaning do I extract? Well, self-care is not selfish anymore. It's not self-indulgent. It's not something I get to do when I finished everything on my to-do list. It's just as much of a priority as my job and my work with clients. So if you take the meaning, how did I grow from it? You can't see it while you're in it, right? Make no mistake. You don't see it when you're in it. When you're in it, you're not going like, how do I take meaning? But you can look back with perspective, right? I couldn't, when I was in the day-to-day with Evan and we were having multiple aggressive outbursts per day, and police were called, and windows were broken. Like, that's trauma over trauma over trauma. And you're not in the middle of that going, oh, I'm so blessed and can extract all this meaning. But when you can look back and grab some perspective, that's called post-traumatic growth. And resilient people who practice resilience go, okay, how do I use that knowledge going forward? So now when I get stressed out over things that I used to think are these huge things and I get overwhelmed, I remind myself, like, you can do hard things. If you can have a 7-year-old in a psych hospital, live in a Ronald McDonald house, take care of him and manage to keep him home instead of being a ward of the state or living at a hospital, then you can figure this out. right? So you just remind yourself of what you've learned and how you've grown. And over time, that becomes a habit to where when things come up, you go, okay, in the grand scheme of things, is this really going to matter in 5 years? Whether or not my book launches the week it's supposed to or a month later? Am I really going to freak out if I don't get this one speaking engagement with a company I want to work with? We all have those stressors, and some of them are like legit real. So it's not that you want to minimize them, but you can also use perspective to remember what you've overcome. And that's a huge internal strength that builds up that buffer zone.
Yeah, I think that life, as I hear it, life. What you're saying is the moments we create, the realities we face, and then there's the stuff we go through. Well, how we're going to get out of it, that's a different story, and what we're going to learn from it.
Right.
Like I served war and horrible things, but now, as you say, when I face a lot of harsh moments, I go back, I say, you survived that. Mm-hmm. How could you not survive this? But the question is, some people, they didn't have our experiences in different ways. Like they didn't have all those harsh moments, like the worst of the worst. And now the little things comes in the way, mm-hmm. and they just throw the towel and say, I'm done. They haven't seen it. It's very hard to not only convince those people that the life is about the moments, it's about what you create, and you got to keep going, and you got to learn and practice resilience. That's, I think, the hardest thing that really right now with all this economy, politics, layoffs, recession, everything else that's happening, people are really, I see it every day, they're giving in, but they don't know that they are strong behind their imagination.
And, I tell people, make a list of everything causing you stress. So people will write COVID, people will write politics.
Because you wrote the book during COVID.
Yeah, I wrote the book during COVID. All these things that you list out. Okay, now go and cross off everything you have no control over. You have no control over whether people get vaccinated. You have no control over whether people wear a mask. You have no control over whether people support Ukraine. You have no control whether people are Democrat or Republican. You have no control over someone's values. You have no control over so many things that we waste all of this energy stressing about. And you only have so much cognitive and emotional energy. It's like a bank account. And if you're not adding to it, you're only taking away. You end up with a zero balance. And that is when health and mental health start becoming a problem. So what are you doing to add deposits to that? And that's where some of those skills come in, right? Most people are so busy at work, they forget that your resume and your eulogy should not be the same thing. Your job is an important part of who you are. I love what I do for a living, but I could easily get sucked into doing 80, 100 hours a week and forgetting that it's part of your identity, but it's not who you are. I've buried 5 people since the beginning of COVID.
Wow.
One of them was one of my dear friends, her 19-year-old son. He was so stressed about his grades. He took a Xanax that he bought online on Snapchat, and he died immediately of a fentanyl overdose.
Oh, my God.
Right? Like, we have to teach our kids distress tolerance. That's why when I have friends who they don't want their kids to experience failure, they get cut from a team and they go argue with the coach, right? That's the way you build resilience. You cannot guard your kids against challenges and difficult experiences, and you have to let them fall and learn and struggle. And as a parent, we don't want that. We want to make our kids' lives easier than ours was. But the only way you build distress tolerance is to have distress. And so we have to be willing to let our kids fall, literally fall. Girls don't take as many risks as boys because parents don't want them to fall on a playground. We have to fall, metaphorically and physically, and we have to learn to get back up and that we're going to survive it. And those are lessons that we need to learn in school. If you get a bad grade, as a parent, you want to call the teacher and argue it. Don't. My daughter went to school with all these folks who, they're already worried in the 8th grade about getting into UT or getting into a good college. And so the parents are arguing with the teacher. We have to learn these lessons. And if you're not willing to let your kids be uncomfortable, they won't know how to deal with discomfort as an adult. So it's just a shift in perspective that is going to take time, but it's necessary if we want to be the resilient people that we're capable of being.
Because I agree with you, because I don't think so. We can change the environment. We cannot control the environment. Mm-hmm. We can control ourselves, how we're going to react, or what environment we're going to put ourselves in. Mm-hmm. If I put myself in the environment that is not benefiting me or hurting me, what do I expect? That's what I always tell people: choose wisely.
Exactly. And what frustrates me beyond measure is somebody who complains about the same problem over and over and over again, but is not willing to do something to fix it, because complaining isn't a solution, right? It might feel good. It might make the person temporarily have that cathartic release, but it's not fixing it. So either it hurts bad enough and you're willing to be uncomfortable, or the outcome you want is so desirable that you're willing to be uncomfortable to chase it. But going over and over and over again with the same problem and not coming up with solutions is the definition of insanity.
Yeah, in one point, I'm sure, I know you and Jay, you discussed that, okay, now what we're going to do with Evan. And that was a hard decision for you to send him overboard, like, in the boarding school. And you did that for some reason, because you didn't do it because you didn't want to deal with it. You didn't do it because that, you want to ignore it, but you made that decision for him to be better.
When Evan was 18 months old, the neurologist said it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when he will be hospitalized. And when he was 7, they said he probably can't live in your home anymore. He needs to go to a group home. And there was no way I was letting my 7-year-old have to go experience that trauma. So we endured it and endured it and endured it. And when he was 15, our doctor said, Evan's psychiatrist said, look, you can either keep going the way you're going and ruin your daughter, your marriage, and your family, or you can do what you need to do and save Evan and your family in the process. And that made it pretty clear. And it was the worst decision I have ever had to make. We had to trick Evan. I mean, to this day, it's gut-wrenching for me to think about it. But we hired someone to find the right program where he could have 24-hour care, where he could have trained staff, where he could have that therapeutic support all the time. I live in Austin, where we are. It was in Idaho. We've been on a list in Texas for now 18 years.
Wow. To
receive services. And we're still 30,000th on the list. In Idaho, because Evan went to high school there, he received services day one. So he lives in a home with 2 roommates and 24-hour staff, and he gets the care that he needs. And do I want him to live 2,000 miles away from me? Of course not. Do I talk to him every single day? Yes. Do I see him as often as possible? Yes. But that decision was like putting to the test, am I desperate enough or am I inspired enough? And in that case, unfortunately, we waited until we were desperate. And we had no choice. We had to keep him safe. And we had to stay safe. And we had to keep our daughter safe. Right? So this isn't easy.
It's not. That's the ultimate resilience. And oh my God, that was really tough.
It was awful. Oh, and note to self, don't climb ladders when you've been through an emotional event. I had to leave after he went to Idaho to do a speaking tour in Europe. And I had already committed to it. I couldn't get out of it. I was miserable. And I came home, and my husband was laying on the garage floor. Jay had fallen off a ladder.
Oh, my God.
And he broke his arm, ribs, and hip. And apparently the emergency room doctor said falls are most common after a traumatic event because you're literally off balance. So look, I'm not suggesting this is easy, and I'm not suggesting if I had the choice, I would have chosen these things, right? But given what is, what's next? And that's my mantra. Given what is, what's next? It's like radical acceptance. I can't fix it. I can't change it. I've done everything I can do. What do I do next? What's the next right thing? And sometimes it's curl up in a ball on the couch and watch an episode of your favorite show. And sometimes it's eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs when you know you shouldn't, right? We make mistakes, but it's giving yourself permission to be human and going, okay, given what is, what's next?
Yeah.
And we don't always know the answer.
Bring me more problems that I can solve it and be stronger.
I don't know if anybody wants more problems. Like I like to think I got all this stuff out on the first half, and so the back half of the life is going to be smooth sailing. But we know it's not, right? You know it's not going to be.
We're going to have a lot of challenges and problems through our lifespan.
Yeah,
we're all going to have it. But the question is, how bad do you want to get out of it?
And I think as kids, like this is the reason I started the book like this. We are taught that life is happily ever after. That if we do the right things and make the right choices, then we'll end up with a white picket fence and a family with 2.5 kids and a dog. And life is full of struggle. It is our expectation that it should be easy that causes suffering. If we approach it as, I'm going to enjoy the crap out of the good moments and savor them and sit in them and just soak it in, because I know that there's going to be the bad ones to offset it, instead of expecting, I can't believe this happened to me. I lost my job, and then this happened, and then this. That is what happens. That is life. When you don't have all that crap happening, enjoy that moment, because it will. And some people might be more blessed than others, but it's not if you're going to go through trauma and challenge. It's just when.
It's how you react to it.
And how you react to it. Because
some people really react so dramatically that they think it's the end of the world.
Well, and I have, with depression, my tendency is to catastrophize. My tendency, my husband calls me Chicken Little, because something will happen. And I'm like, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. And it helps to have someone check me, right? Because my default sometimes is still to go worst case scenario. My negativity bias is magnified because of the depression. So I really, I have to, for some people, this is easier than others. It is much harder for me than it is for someone who's doesn't have clinical depression or anxiety. May is Mental Health Month, right? So what can I do about that? Well, I can talk about the fact that I struggle too, because it makes it safe for other people too. 1 in 3 adults will have an anxiety disorder in their lifetime. Half of adults will have a mental health diagnosis in their lifetime.
Wow.
Right? We have to talk about it to make it safe for people to be who they are and not feel shame. You wouldn't have shame for having diabetes or cancer or broken leg.
And why people, they have shame of hey, I'm depressed, or I have this mental disorder, or I don't know why we do that. Is it really embarrassing?
We view it as a mental weakness where it's really just biology. So just like you have no control over how short or tall you are, you have no control over whether your brain produces enough serotonin and dopamine or not, right? Yes, you can learn skills and you can learn tools, and with enough therapy and enough practice, these things get better. But I can't change my biology. It's like saying, I don't want to be 5'3" anymore. I want to be 5'10". Okay, well, sorry, it is what it is, right? Yeah. I'm not ashamed of it. So I think it's shifting the conversation, because people view it as a moral or mental weakness. It's just biology. That's
and
all
education.
It is. And everybody has anxiety. It's natural. Everybody gets sad. It's natural. It's when those feelings pervade your life so much that it impacts your relationships, your ability to do your work, your ability to live a fulfilling life. Once it crosses that threshold, that's when you need to seek help.
That's what you say, mind over moments.
Right. And it's because we have every day throughout the day, we have these choices of whether we recalibrate. Like, how many times have we woken up in a bad mood and went, screw it, my day is just going to be bad, yep. Right? We have bad moments. Most of us, those moments we magnify in our minds and extrapolate it out to a day or a week or a month or a year. I hear people say 2020, oh my God. Yes, it was horrible. But in it, you had lots of these beautiful moments. We just lump it all together. And I think it's human. I think it's very human. But in the moment, if we can learn to read what our nervous system is doing and go, oh, wow, my heart is racing, My breathing is fast. My stomach hurts. What's going on? My body's trying to tell me, like, it's kind of like, a smoke detector has that annoying, like, loud pitched chirp. And you run around the house trying to figure out which detector it is and where it's coming from. All of a sudden you're like Columbo and you finally find it, right? And you change the battery. That's what anxiety is. It's our built-in fire alarm. Most of us just ignore the chirp. It's telling you, change the battery. Something needs to change, either the way you're looking at it or what you're doing about it or the resources you have devoted to it. You need to change the battery.
Yeah, and if change, you don't want to change it, and I know change is scary.
Yeah.
And you got to deal with what you are in it, because I always tell people, everything is start with change. If you don't want to change, you can't change. And change is something that we're not comfortable with.
Because it is uncomfortable to do things differently. It's literally growing pains for your brain. It's uncomfortable. For example, I swore up and down that I would never meditate. I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world.
And now you do.
Now I do. Why? Because I misunderstood what it was. I would sit there and try to breathe, and then my mind would race and think about what we were going to have for dinner, or the fact that I forgot to call my mother, or that my dog might have to go to the vet. And I kept thinking I was failing. That means it's working. So, Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist, great podcast, Huberman Lab. So meditation is not the act of focusing, it's the act of refocusing. It's training your attention to go where you want it to go, not where it goes on its own. So if you feel like it's really hard and not peaceful, that means it's working. And so for me, that was really powerful because my mind runs away with negative thoughts and worst case scenarios and defaults to that negativity bias. But you can train your brain. That's what mind over moment is. In the moment, I can go, okay, is this a productive use of my mental energy right now? So I give myself a worry window. I dedicate 30 minutes a day where I can worry about anything I want to worry about. And when I'm done, I'm done.
Basically, you give your brain a permission.
Yeah. Because when you're like, oh, don't worry about that, don't think about that, you think about it and worry about it even more. So give yourself time to ruminate and worry and think about it, and then give yourself permission to move on. But that's what meditation and mindfulness does. It gives your brain the ability to move on rather than stay stuck. And so, yeah, it's frustrating. It is rarely, if ever, peaceful for me. It is difficult, and it is life-changing because you tap into your nervous system. And your body changes your brain, not the other way around.
I think all of this that we were talking about, it comes down to science.
A lot of it.
Like, I'm listening to you and saying, okay, resilience, okay, it's not like a behavioral things or duty, it's all science.
Well, it's also behavioral, right? So you have to behave your way to better. You can't just know the science. I can know about this. That doesn't mean I naturally practice it. So I can know gratitude and the science behind it, but if I'm not actively looking for things in my environment to feel good about,
then it's not going to work.
Then it's not going to work. I can know that humor signals safety to your brain and produces the same brain chemistry as eating 2,000 chocolate bars. I can understand how powerful social connection is and humor and pro-social behavior. Knowing it and doing it are different. And so it is science, but it has to be practiced so often that your brain just defaults to it.
Everything is happening to us. It's all based on what we practice.
And sometimes it's not happening to us, it's happening for us.
For us.
And we just don't see it until time has passed.
Like what happened to you, I think, when I listened to you, made you so strong. And I don't know if anything else can bring you down. I don't know.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You think so?
Absolutely. That's I find myself constantly getting caught up in worrying about things that aren't all that important. And I have to remind myself, like, you've been through this, you can get through that, and it doesn't mean that we're immune to feeling icky. It's just learning what you do with it instead of getting bogged down in it and getting in this hole that you feel like you can't get out of.
We have a lot of people right now that they're going through rough times. for any reasons. They can't get out of it. They're battling mental illness, relationships, life, jobs. What advice do you have for those people that right now listening or watching, they're going through those rough times, what they should do?
Well, when we try to change everything at once, we change nothing at all. It's why New Year's resolutions rarely work. At the end of December, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to the gym, I'm volunteering, and then by the middle of January, you have a beer in one hand, a cheeseburger in the other, you went to the gym, it hurt. Why would I do that? What I would say is pick one small change and practice it over and over and over again until it becomes a habit. So for example, I don't love exercise. It is not something that I look forward to, but it has the biggest impact on your mood and health because it's changing your nervous system, it's changing your brain, it's repairing neurons damaged by stress, it's restoring gray matter density, which helps regulate emotion and attention and focus. So one small step might be walking to your mailbox instead of driving to it, or walking for 5 minutes a day. And you do that for a month, and that's the only thing you change. You take a 5-minute walk every single day. Or you set a timer and for 5 minutes, and you write down things that make you feel grateful or things that cause you to smile. Or you take a daily vitamin. Maybe that's the only change you make for an entire month. Or maybe you decide once a day I'm going to reach out and text somebody and tell them I'm thinking about them. It doesn't matter what the change is. The other thing you can do, there's a concept called habit stacking, which S.J. Scott originated with S.J. Scott, and then James Clear kind of blew it up with Atomic Habits. And it's practice these things while you are doing something else that you would already do. So I brush my teeth twice a day. That's when I practice gratitude. It's not like an extra thing on my to-do list. It happens when I'm going to sleep. I sleep every night, so I meditate when I'm going to sleep. I don't have to add it to that. My friend Lisa says, it's a doorway habit. Every time you walk through a doorway, which you walk through all the time, pick a habit you want to develop and do it every time you walk through a doorway. So figure out how you want to show up, what mood you want to bring into the room. And every time you walk into a doorway, be deliberate about bringing that mood into the room. It's just subtle changes over time that build up, not a big change because it can't stick.
We are the creature of habits.
We are. And Aristotle said, it's basically excellence is not one or two things. Excellence is creating these habits that make you better and make you happier. And it's a slog. It is a slow process, and it doesn't take 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. It takes however long your brain takes, because you've been thinking and behaving the way you think and behave probably for a very long time. And that has embedded those patterns so deeply into your brain that it's become your default. If you want a different default, you have to practice it over and over and over and over again. And you have to have a visual reminder of it. So I have sticky notes all over the place, right? Out of sight, out of mind. So pick one thing and start there.
Life is not all sunshine and rainbows, and life can be mean, brutal, but as you said, life is all about the moments we create, and then what we have, and be grateful for it and enjoy every second of it. But I can talk about you all day and about resilience. Really, I enjoy it. This is a very fascinating subject for me, how we can be a better person and, have a better life through all this chaos and, all this stuff that we go through these days. But there's always a way, and that ends up with us. Yeah. How we're going to, tell ourselves the stories that it will help us to get through this and makes us a stronger and a better person. But if the people, they want to reach out to you, how they can reach out to you? I know you can search Anne Grady TEDx talk. You got to watch that. I'll watch it. That's very fascinating. Watch that. Just search it on the YouTube. You will see it. But besides that, how they can reach out to you?
So my website is annegradygroup.com. And if you go to annegradygroup.com/strong, I have a bunch of free resources for you and a Tuesday newsletter. Each Tuesday, it's a tip, tool, or strategy just to help you cultivate that muscle, that resilience muscle. And know that you can't do it alone. you need support. We're not meant to travel through this life alone. We're meant to depend on each other.
We all need help. And thank you for being here. And, keep up with the great work. And you're changing lives. And I'm sure you know that.
So are you, Rami. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, dear.